the capacity to recruit young people. This has metastasized, and it is widespread, and it has penetrated communities around the world.
Every day we are confronted with news of terrorists in far-flung places such as Yemen, Iraq, Asian countries with names most people could barely pronounce. And we're told about what their actions can and will mean to America down the road. But there are groups out there we rarely speak about, and they have America square in their sights, possibly from right around your corner. Let's welcome to Midpoint instructor of the Academy of Counter-Terrorist Education at Louisiana State University, Martin Johnson joins us today. Martin, thanks so much for being here today.
You're very welcome.
What kind of groups are we talking about here? Because we all know about the standard groups, the Boko Haram, the ISIS, ISIL, Al-Qaeda. But what we're talking about here right now are groups that we normally don't hear their names, and yet we know that there's an American connection here, that they're after us. Who are we talking about?
Well, there can be any number of groups, and one thing that we try to tell law enforcement officers and other government officials is that two people make a group. So two people or more can form a group, and as long as they're very quiet about it, we'll never know, or we don't know until it's too late. There are other groups that have been in the United States, and you mentioned Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has been in the United States. There have been groups in the United States for years, and in all probability, they're still here. There's no way in the world to clean up all the terrorists in the United States.
But let me stop you for a second here. When you're talking about groups that are here in the United States and Al-Qaeda being here, I want to go back to what you said a couple of moments ago. You said two people make a group. So what you're talking about here, it could be two people, three people. We're not talking about 10, 20, 30 or more, are we?
Well, we hope not. But there's no way to know. And let me give you an example. You may recall years ago, the Mumbai attacks. Now, the Mumbai attacks were carried out by a group called Lashkar-e-Taiba, headquartered in Pakistan and out of Pakistan. Members of that group, they were only 10, and they put India into absolute bedlam for days and killed lots of people and caught things on fire and blew things up. That's their job. There have been members of Lashkar-e-Taiba found here in the United States. There have been people who have been convicted of supporting Lashkar-e-Taiba. There were 7 in Virginia just a few years ago.
All right, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here because we're talking about, again, these smaller groups that we don't hear much about, and many of them are based overseas. And, of course, isn't it fair to say that all of these terrorist groups, every single one of them, they focus on America because they want to make a big splash here. This is the place where if they do something, it's going to be seen, it's going to be covered. But do they really have the money and the wherewithal to pull off an attack like an Al-Qaeda or an ISIS?
Money can be a problem for them, but money doesn't always have to be a problem. The 9/11 attacks were pulled off with an investment of $500,000. That's the value of my house and my next door neighbor's house combined. That's it. It took 2.5 years of planning and $500,000, and they killed 2,996 people by putting the planes into the ground and into the buildings. It doesn't take much as far as money goes, and any group or any person, individual or group, who wants to carry out a terrorist attack can do so for very little money. Witness the Boston Marathon bombing.
But it would seem as if what you're telling us right now, I got to be very honest with you, would make a lot of people frightened at this point, because you're leading us to believe, and again, you know better than we do, that it's one person, two people, the bombs that are being made, the murderous intent that's being thrown in here, that they want to kill Americans. How do we find them? How do we stop them? I mean, it would seem as if what you're talking about right now would be, if we were to extrapolate, millions of terrorists from different groups, basically potentially hiding right around the corner.
I wouldn't suggest for a moment that there are millions of terrorists in the United States. I'm sure that there aren't, but it doesn't take that many to pull something off, to pull off a terrorist attack. Remember that terrorism is attacking people and property for a belief and with the purpose of coercing behavior, changing the behavior of people or governments. That's the germ. That's the idea from which terrorist acts spring. In 2009, there were two members of Al Qaeda. You mentioned the bomb making. There were two men found in Bowling Green, Kentucky, arrested, convicted. Great, thank goodness. In 2009, and they were confirmed Al Qaeda members from Iraq, and they were in the United States. And they actually, by lying on a form, by checking the box that said, "I'm not a terrorist," they were allowed to come into the United States legally.
Then what are we missing, Martin? I got about 2 minutes left here. With all these people here, with the potential then, not millions, but thousands, hundreds, whatever it is, what are we as Americans and a security and a law enforcement missing? And how do we stop these cockroaches from breeding?
Well, enforcement of laws. Believe it or not, an awful lot of terrorist acts that have been thwarted from September 11, 2001 to now have been thwarted by ordinary law enforcement. And that's one of the things that I try to teach ordinary law enforcement officers. It is entirely possible that any law enforcement officer or civilian may encounter some situation which involves somebody who's involved in terrorism. Quick, for instance, I live in Howard County, Maryland. It's 254 square miles of the whole planet. And up to September 11th, we had 5 of the 9/11 terrorists living here in my county. They were here living, breathing, eating, drinking, driving, going to the gym among us. They were noticed, and they were noticed by civilians, some of whom just decided, well, they're very unusual, but I don't want to call anybody. It sounds colloquial, but if you do see something that you think is unusual, you should let somebody know. And that's not just for civilians, that's for police and other emergency response people too.
30 seconds. Does it bother you a little bit maybe that sometimes police and law enforcement can't search people certain times, that they're held back by certain laws? Does that bother you?
I was a police officer and detective for 25 years, and I never had the experience where I could not legally search a person's pockets, car, or home. I was never left wanting for that information. But that doesn't mean that doesn't happen.
And let's hope certainly that the law enforcement officials who are out there right now use those laws and are able to help try to find at least 1 or 2 of these, because 1 or 2 of them can make a heck of a mess. Martin Johnson, fascinating stuff. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll talk again.
Very well, thank you.
Take care. She is the undeniable force without whom there would be no real entertainment as we head for the 2016 presidential election. Where has Hillary Clinton been of late? And to what extent is her money machine getting into gear? That and a whole lot more after the break, right here on Midpoint.